All right. Well, welcome to this session of Accessibility for Organizations presented by the Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium and the Idaho Assistive Technology Project. Today, we're going to try to cover what is accessibility, provide some examples, help organizations kind of build the case for accessibility beyond just having people who know some skills to make some things accessible. We'll do a few more demonstrations in there as well, but before we jump into the meat of that content, I want to do some quick introductions. For those who are not familiar with the Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium, or IDAC, this is an informal group of stakeholders from state agencies and the disability community in the state of Idaho. The mission is to improve the accessibility of information and resources published by Idaho state agencies for Idaho's citizens. The Idaho Assistive Technology Project is one of our key stakeholders. They provide resources for technical assistance, support, and training for other stakeholders free of charge, as well as all of the resources for our webinars and recordings.
And a little bit about the Assistive Technology Project. It is a project, a federally and state funded project that provides support to individuals with disabilities, older persons and their families in their process of selecting, finding, and utilizing assistive technology to live, work, and play in their communities. We produce and sponsor trainings on topics related to assistive technology in general, as well as accessibility, digital accessibility, like we're talking about here, information communication technology, which is in line with that digital accessibility, and really all things related to AT, or assistive technology.
Jump into a little bit about your presenters. I am Lane Amaro. I'm a certified professional in web accessibility. I own Amaro AT Consulting, an independent accessibility consulting company based in Boise, Idaho. I need to update this slide because we are now at 7 years of experience in digital accessibility and auditing. I also have 10 years of assistive technology training and assistance experience as a vocational rehabilitation teacher, helping individuals who are blind or visually impaired learn to use assistive technology, and assisting employers in accommodating employees who are visually impaired, blind, or have dual sensory loss, both hearing and vision loss. As a certified professional in web accessibility, I have passed the International Association of Accessibility Professionals exams for Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies, and a second exam for Web Accessibility Specialist. The CPWA designation just means I have passed both of those exams and have demonstrated competency and knowledge and understanding in all of the domains in those exams, as it relates to web accessibility in particular. And I am kind of branching out into the built environment a little bit as well, out of the digital accessibility space. And I'm also looking at sitting for a third exam in digital space, the accessible document specialist as well. A lot of opportunities to demonstrate knowledge and experience through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And just a little bit more on the educational front, I also have a master's in assistive technology and human services from California State University, Northridge, and a bachelor's in public communications from Upper Iowa University in a tiny little town in Northeast Iowa. So been moving around the country, landing here in Idaho.
And just to let you know, we have a very highly qualified presenter here. Lane is extremely good at what she does and has the background to support it as well. My name is Nicholas Stallings. I'm the Boise Assistive Technology Coordinator, one of our 4 locations here in Idaho. I have over 10 years working with people with this experience, working with people with disabilities in all capacities. And right now I focus on our deafblind equipment distribution program, computer access, our assistive technology lending library, and then working with our SMEs, our subject matter experts like Lane Amaro, to provide trainings to state agencies and the public in general.
He also does a lot with alternative augmentative communication and all kinds of things. So he jumps right in to that assistive technology and helping people figure this out. So really excited to be presenting with Nick and starting to talk about what is accessibility. This session is being recorded rather than presented live. So Nick and I are probably going to have a little bit more conversational presentation style here than we might in a live webinar session. And so Nick, jump in whenever you have something to add, because there's a lot of experience in there as well. So I'm going to jump right into what is accessibility. And if you look at the word in and of itself, it should be fairly explanatory. It's the ability to access. And I've got a lot of extra text on my screen.
Yeah, so just going back there, the ability to access both the digital and the physical world, right? Accessibility isn't just about automatic door openers or elevators and stairs, things like that, but making sure our content is accessible to assistive technologies and is able to be manipulated for assistive technologies and users to make sure that everyone can access that digital content. Right?
And it's all about experiences too, right? It goes just, it's big picture. It's about the whole person. We talk about accessibility most often in the disability space. It's kind of more of a usability concept because we all have to be able to use and be able to access things. But the word accessibility is tied tightly to the disability community. So we grabbed a definition of disability from the Center for Disease Control. Any condition of the body or mind, an impairment that makes it more difficult for a person with the condition to do certain activities, also known as activity limitations, and interact with the world around them. This interacting with the world around them, those are considered limitations to participation. There's a whole lot of definitions about disability, but I like this one a lot because it touches on both the fact that there is a condition that is causing some sort of limitation, but also that it has to do with everything around you. It's not just an individual's problem.
I really like that definition speaks to these models of disability as well when we're talking about disability and how context is very important, how we're going to view disability.
There's tons of different models out there at this point. The two prevailing models have been the medical model and the social model. I've summarized here on this slide that, essentially at the core of it, the medical model frames disability in a context of something about a person that must be cured or fixed in order for them to be whole. Where the social model looks at the disability in a bigger context. The condition the person experiences is not necessarily the problem, but the one's social and physical and digital environments, the environments in which the person with the condition is trying to live, work, and play is the problem. And those are kind of the two overarching models. I think Nick and I both have a philosophy that's somewhere in the middle. We acknowledge that conditions do create limitations for people, but assistive technology can be used to mitigate those limitations to an extent and used in different environments. So we're kind of somewhere in between. in this model. But this is where your accessibility and your disability connect. Like, let Nick give a couple of examples here about our physical environment, though, because we want to take a look at these environments in which we live, work, and play, and the things that are in those environments to make it easier, no matter what kind of condition you might live with.
Absolutely, yeah. So everyone can think about the basic accessibility features for a wheelchair user, right? Somebody who needs alternative access to stairs, so to speak. That tends to be the first thing that comes to our mind. And of course, the universal sign of access and disability is an individual using a wheelchair, right? But when we're talking about physical environments, we're talking about ramps, things like ramps or even elevators technically, right? Automatic door openers. I know I am definitely one who relies on things because I carry too much all the time, to using those automatic door openers with my elbow, right? That is a piece of physical accessibility. Zero entry pools, things like that make it super easy to interact and to use the things that you're going to use, right? Or use your environment. And even things like standing desks, adjustable height desks, or alternative keyboards, the things that we have at our workstation where might help with ergonomics or being able to change positions. You know, an adjustable height desk can be really helpful for wheelchair users who need to be able to adjust while how they're sitting in their wheelchair, especially those electronic or automatic wheelchairs, right? Alternative keyboards can be helpful for someone who has trouble with, rather than just our ergonomics and touching the keyboard, anyone who maybe has tremors or has problems with isolating. These physical changes, right? The changes to the physical environment make it more accessible and open to really anyone who needs to use them, rather than being a barrier.
One of my favorite examples that I think we all take for granted are the seriously automatic doors at the grocery store, right? They're motion sensor.
They see you coming and they open for you.
Yep.
100%.
Yeah, and I think we all take those a little bit for granted. And the Fred Meyer over here off of Chinden and Glenwood has one of their entrances has the motion detection automatic doors, and then the other side has all manual doors. And I get a strong reminder of how much I take the motion sensor entry for granted when I go into that store, when I pick that manual door, and I'm like, oh, now I gotta pull it open.
Exactly. So. And this speaks, the physical environment speaks to, and how we remediate those is the social model, right? And a good way of looking at the social model of disability is that if everyone had the disability, quote unquote, or condition, what would the world look like? And that's where the social model comes in, and how, like Lane talks about, how much we take these things for granted and how we use them. They were built as an access idea, right? To provide access to someone who can't use the doors, those manual doors as well. Well, now we're all using them and it's become a part of life. So it's kind of making sure that lens we're looking at isn't really that individual has a disability that needs to be fixed, so to speak, or is broken in any way, but that society isn't organized in a way that is accessible to all of our citizens, right?
Our digital environment gets a little trickier, though. Our physical environment, we all engage with at different levels, and there's not, I'm trying to think of the right word, but kind of a veneer over the top of it to make it look like something it's not. And in our digital space, that can happen. So some of the examples, though, that are pretty obvious in our digital worlds, closed captioning. We have our awesome captioner with us today who is going to make sure that our words are all captured in text for our friends out there who aren't going to be able to hear us, or who might watch this video in a loud environment. But this is an example of kind of that automatic door opener, that motion activated door opening in the physical world, where closed captions are becoming especially more and more accepted and more widely used in the digital environment. But they're one that's pretty obvious. Either it's there or it's not if you need it. Some of the other things, though, that we have here on this list: alternative text, appropriate reflow. These are features behind digital content that make it usable by assistive technology. And unless you use that assistive technology, you're not going to know that it exists. There's not a button on the web page that works like your button automatic door openers, right? You can see that in your physical environment and you know, oh, I can go push that button and it'll open for me. These things are hidden behind that two-dimensional space that is our digital content. So this is a little bit trickier to make happen. I think we've got some examples coming up, but these are some of the things that we experience in the digital space, and is definitely a little bit more difficult and requires some pretty skilled people to make happen. Our social environment, though, these are the things like our attitudes and perceptions about the people that we see in the world and what we think they can or cannot do. I usually turn to myths about disability when I talk about these social environments. One of the biggest barriers to people with disability getting jobs is the attitude of hiring managers, that people with disabilities won't be reliable, that they couldn't do the job because their condition would prohibit them. This is a social concept or construct that would prohibit someone with a disability, where if there was kind of a mindset shift, that person could have more of an opportunity. Some of those other myths, people without disabilities should care for people with disabilities. This is another social attitude that says we should care for those who cannot care for themselves, but it assumes that the person can't care for themselves. So we've got to be kind of careful about these mindsets as we engage with people in the world who might use assistive technology or might ask for more time or clarification, and making sure that our social environments, we're not only putting forth motion detected automatic doors. Again, that's a social idea, right? That somebody came up with that said, this is going to give greater access to more people living with particular conditions. But that wouldn't have come about if the social idea that we have to care for people with disabilities hadn't existed prior, right? And there's a lot of interconnectivity. I know I'm not saying this the best way I possibly could.
I think it sounds great.
Yeah, one of the other big ones too that we hear a lot is that there's no big return on investment for making environments accessible. We might get past some of those attitudes that, okay, yeah, people with disabilities can live, work, and play in the world. And there's infrastructure like ramps to help them, or automatic pedestrian signals or anything like that to help them around in the world. But it's not going to do me any good to make my content accessible to someone or my building accessible to someone with a disability because they wouldn't use my product or my service. We'll jump into that here in a second. A little bit more, but there is this attitude that there are so few disabled people, it doesn't do me any good to go out of my way to make that accessible to them. And again, like that's an attitude that can be adjusted. And we'll jump into the business case of why and how we can address some of these social attitudes. We're going to jump back into the digital real quick, though, do another example of a digital accessibility.
That's, if you want to go back real quick too, Lane, I just wanted to speak to the return on investment as well as talking about our automatic door openers and how those are standards now. Pretty much any grocery store or any store you go into nowadays, a lot of them, if they're big enough, of course, they will have automatic door openers on them. But 1 in 5 people in the world or in the United States has a disability. That's 20% of our population. And so when we're thinking about accessibility, we're talking about a fifth of our population. And some with that, we can imagine by using our automatic door openers as an example, that as we incorporate accessible practices or accessibility into our practices, that they will apply to way more than that 20%, that 1 in 5 people, right? And eventually does become a standard that we all take for granted because that's all what we all have.
Yeah, and it's kind of expanding on that a little bit too. You think that's 1 in 5 people who have a disability, but how many of their friends and family are how many friends do they have? How many family members do they have? These are an extension of that person's experience. And as we watch kind of our culture and our society shift, it's been a lot of fun to watch how millennials engage with the world, because they buy from companies that meet their personal or kind of, I don't want to say meat, but meat's not quite the right word, but they have similar social ethics. And so millennials in particular choose where they work, where they shop based on things like, let's say green energy is important to them. So they'll shop at organizations and businesses that have green energy kind of policies and procedures built into how they work. And it's the same with people with disabilities and their friends and family. If my husband, for example, if he knows that a business near our home has been welcoming to me as a person with a disability who uses a service dog, he's going to choose that facility over another, even when he's by himself, because he knows that his family as a whole is welcome there. So while we might be talking about 1 in 5 serving 20% or 1/5 of the population who have disabilities, we have to extend that to their friends and family as well. Goes a little bit beyond just the people with disabilities. And Nick, I'm going to let you talk about screen readers real quick. I'm going to actually have to stop the screen share real quick to prepare for the next demonstration. So if you talk about screen readers while I do that.
Absolutely. So a screen reader is a piece of assistive technology generally used by someone with a vision impairment. The whole idea is that it is a tool that someone can use to understand and interact with all of the content that they're going to find on a computer. In its most basic form, it does what its name is. It reads the screen, but using various keystrokes, using various key commands, you can manipulate that screen reader to do certain things for the computer and interact with the entire computer. This also goes for smartphones as well. Screen readers are available on smartphones. There are many different types of screen readers available. And everyone, I would say, is at varying degrees on their usability. I can open up and use a screen reader on the very, very basic utilization, whereas Lane can actually do website testing and can glean from the information that she can access where the website is failing or doing good in terms of their accessibility issues. And we use a screen reader as a demonstration and visual impairment in general for accessibility because it is our bottom floor, so to speak. It is going to make sure that we are getting everything, we're including everything from the ground up in terms of accessibility. And if your website or your digital documents are accessible to a screen reader, chances are, and there's a little asterisk there usually, as with our field all the time, chances are it's going to be accessible to every other assistive technology. And going back to that digital space, thinking about alternative text, thinking about captions or transcripts, thinking about reflow, if it is going to jive with a screen reader, it's probably going to jive with everything else. Your website will jive with everything else that you're trying to, or your digital content with
Live
everything else you're
transcription.
trying
Close.
to.
Meeting controls.
All right.
So I didn't want to talk over the screen reader.
Yeah,
But I'll let
and
Lane
I was
go
trying
ahead.
to make it work as quieted
Participants
as
can now
quickly
see
as
your
possible.
PowerPoint slideshow introduction to accessibility for organizations 2022
So we have a
PPTX protected.
we have a screen reader here reading some information on the screen. So it started reading more about screen readers, but I turned it on here to demonstrate, like, this is an example of how I mentioned before when we were talking about digital examples, how it can be kind of deceiving. It can be difficult to see that the accessibility isn't there in that two-dimensional space.
Slideshow slide 17. Looks are deceiving. Looks are deceiving.
This slide only says to me with the screen reader that looks are deceiving. But visually, there is an image on this screen that has a quote inside of it. That information isn't available to that screen reader because the accessibility features haven't yet been put in place. I'm going to go to my next slide here, though, to show you how the accessibility is in place, but visually it still looks exactly the same.
Looks are deceiving Google. The issue with web accessibility is the fact that blind and visually impaired people need the single biggest boost to achieve equivalence, since the real world web is a visual medium. Joe Clark.
A lot more information read there. Nick, do I need to slow that down? I always forget.
Maybe go back and let it run. I think it's slow enough. But you can see too, to speak to screen readers, how well Elaine listens to things a lot faster than all of us can comprehend, right?
And this is still slow for me. So I was like, wait, was that actually slow enough? So I'm
So
going to
maybe
slow
if
it down.
you just run it again or slow it down. Yeah.
I'm going to slow it down, and then we'll go back a slide and listen to the information that's available. And then we'll come back here and listen to the information that's available. So let
Pitch
me,
50. Rate 60. Rate 55. Rate 50.
all right, so I'm going to go back to the previous slide. It's going to look the same visually because the accessibility content is not there for the screen reader.
Slideshow slide 17. Looks are deceiving. Looks are deceiving.
All the content that is spoken is that looks are deceiving, but the image is there. I'm going to go to the next slide, and we'll listen to that again to hear the difference for that screen reader. But know that the screen, I mean, it looks exactly the same.
Looks are deceiving Google. The issue with web accessibility is the fact that blind and visually impaired people need the single biggest boost to achieve equivalence, since the real world web is a visual medium. Joe Clark.
I think that was a little more clear. Just slowed it down just enough. But this is why the digital is so hard, and why organizations are going to need to have skilled people in them. In the built environment, we need people who are aware, but not necessarily. I mean, the architects know, like that is all put in place outside of the organization in most cases. But digital is an ongoing project, and it's a little deceptive because it can look exactly the same, but in that two-dimensional space, it's very different to the assistive technology user.
It's really great. I'm seeing, Lane. That's so similar. You can't even see that Lane is changing the slide, but I promise you she is. I'm following along here on our slideshow, and we have two slides there. You can see how focused on how visually focused it is. You can't even see the slide change, right? So you can see that you wouldn't know that that's there without knowing that back end information. So what Lane's talking about with individual understanding and having experience in that, right, is going to be helpful for it, because you can't see it. It's in another place. And really, you can't see it if you look in the right areas.
PowerPoint.
We're so visually, like the quote says, the world is a visual medium, and is that's how we rely on. Even just think about how we access things using the mouse and our eyes and the coordination of our eyes and our hands to use a mouse. It's all dependent on visuals, right? Whereas if we have an accessible space or accessible documents or accessible web, it's available to everyone, all right? Regardless of how you're going, what tools or how you're going to access that content.
All right, and I think I got it switched so you can't hear my screen reader now, so we can jump into more of the business case. Woohoo! Get my speed back up so that I can kind of read along here, but we're going to jump into more of that business case, right? We spent some time on that return on excuse me, return on investment, we were talking about social accessibility and those myths. Some of the other reasons for this, for adopting an accessibility program that looks at your digital, looks at your built, looks at organizational attitudes in that social environment. First, because the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 and 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, I didn't have it on here, but Section 255 of the Telecommunications Act, because they all say so. I don't like digging too much into it. This is not my favorite reason. It feels like I'm throwing down a hammer, right? No, but the law does say so. And there are consequences for not being accessible from a legal aspect. Ultimately, though, it's the right thing to do. Again, we are talking between 15 and 20% of the population may have a disability where accessibility could improve access to whatever product or service or information or resource that you and your organization happen to be offering. The last thing here is that I put on here is the opportunity to create jobs, and that's to create jobs for people with disabilities. When you start making your organization accessible, you're making it accessible to your constituents or your customers, sure, but it has that trickle-down effect of making the work environment more accessible to and more desirable for people with disabilities to get into the workforce. And you think about it, the more people who are working, the more people who are spending money because they have it, right? So how is that going to be bad for our economy? There's a whole lot of reasons why making an organization accessible to constituents and to employees can be super helpful. Not to mention, when you have employees with disabilities in your offices, engaging with all other employees, a lot of really great ideas can come from that. I can't tell you how many do-it-yourself assistive technologies Nick and I run across because we're working with people with disabilities and problem solving with them. Some really great ideas come out of that. And some may be just for that one person in that one situation. Others might be the next big idea, the next big assistive technology that can really make a difference in someone's life. So a lot of really great reasons. And by this point, a lot of people, because no one intentionally sits here and goes, how can I make sure that that blind person can't come in here, make sure that that deaf person can't work here? Nobody sits there and think, well, okay, I sure hope nobody sits there and thinks those things. It just happens because we don't always think about it. But now hopefully we've got people thinking about it, and this slide is just redundant. As we've gone through this though, Nick, have you thought of any other kind of concepts that would be a really good reason for an organization to adopt an accessibility program?
I really think you hit it all there. And I think something that speaks to is you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of the times, and we've seen this just with our push for ICT and more accessibility for training organizations and showing people how to make accessible documents, is that you don't realize how many people you missed until you start looking at how many people appreciate that extra step that you did. And it's really impossible to know what you don't know, right? And I know that we've seen just through, we'll get on to our next slide, our organizational change has really opened up a lot of opportunities that we didn't even consider when we started this. IDAC used to have a different name, and back then I know we were not even close to considering or understanding the implications that these trainings could have, how helpful that they would be for organizations. And so it's a great opportunity when you start looking at accessibility and thinking from that perspective of including everyone possible, really everyone, that it really opens up a lot of doors and a lot of things that you wouldn't expect.
And if you've bought into kind of why you need to have an organizational accessibility program, you're kind of thinking, okay, how do I do that? And the Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium has evolved from, it used to have, like Nick said, it had a different name, and it continues to evolve. This series is going to be an evolution for what IDAC offers. When we started, our goal was to kind of assess the current state of accessibility in different aspects of Idaho state government. And then we got into a stage of like putting out fires, giving people skills to make digital content more accessible and more usable by people with disabilities who use assistive technology. So that's kind of this last item. I put it down here at the bottom of our what do you need list, the skilled people, but that's where we have spent the last 3 years really focusing on getting people who want to make digital content more accessible. We've been doing what we can to get them the basic skills, but it's putting out fires, because every time a new document gets published on a website and it's not accessible, you've got to go find that skilled person to go make it accessible. And they're just constantly putting out fires and trying to be that single accessibility champion across potentially a gigantic organization where not everyone is thinking about it. That social environment again, right? If not everybody in the environment and in that social group has awareness, then they're not necessarily moving in the same direction. So those skilled people have been putting out fires. So this is why we've come back to organizational accessibility programs and what you need. The skilled people are going to be critical, absolutely. But we started with the kind of that assessment of current accessibility situation. And different stakeholders within the Accessibility Consortium, different state agencies have been doing some of this on their own to see what else they need to make their experiences, their information, their resources more accessible to the broader audience of Idaho citizens, Idaho citizens. There we go. Idaho citizens, that's the word, with disabilities. So you start with that appraisal. You have the skilled people. You might even have stakeholders of your own. So you might identify in the appraisal process, you might identify employees who have disabilities and use assistive technology, and you know that they're going to be stakeholders with valuable feedback in an accessibility process or to those skilled people. You might identify citizens that you're serving who give feedback to those skilled people. Those are your stakeholders. Those are all great, but without the glue of policies, procedures, plans, and leadership or executive support, all of those things stand alone and on their own cannot sustain a whole program. So you really need all of these things, right? How good is your sugar, brown sugar, flour, and salt and cinnamon in your chocolate chip cookie recipe if you don't add the butter and the eggs, right? It's half of that recipe. And I'm kind of borrowing this cookie analogy from a very well-known person in the digital accessibility legal landscape. Lainey Feingold is a very impressive litigator. He focuses on structured negotiation and the legal aspect, but she, a few years back, came up with this cookie concept. And it really fits here. To make accessibility happen for people, you have to have all of the pieces, all of the ingredients, not just some of them. Otherwise, you just have a bowl of dry ingredients that, just will immediately fall apart if you dump it out of the bowl, right? So these are going to be some of the things that over the next couple months, some of our presenters will jump into, how they are actually making these things happen, right? Because I can say you need executive leadership buy-in, but how do you get that? And that's going to be different from organization to organization. So I'm hoping that we still don't have the full outlines from our April and May presenters, but it's our hope that they will be able to share more about how they get that executive buy-in, how they're going about writing policies and procedures, and some of these, what I would call binding or the wet ingredients in your cookie recipe, to make it all stick together as a whole program, which eventually, is a plan, and having mechanisms in that plan for monitoring and changing. Because I forgot to look past this slide, but I've got a quote somewhere that says, accessibility is not a project. This is not a one-time plan that you put together. This is, I think, where it diverges from my cookie analogy that I'm borrowing, because accessibility is not a project, it's a lifestyle. It is always changing, just like our technology is always changing. So these are going to be your core ingredients. You're going to need your executive buy-in, an appraisal of a current accessibility situation. You're going to need stakeholders and to set goals. So you're going to need people with disabilities. You're going to need the employees and skilled people who would be stakeholders in this bigger picture, who are doing the work. You're going to need a plan. You're going to need policies and procedures as part of that plan. You're going to need a system for monitoring, ongoing, and to allow for adapting and contingencies. And you're going to need the skilled people, which up until this point is where IDAC has put our focus. The Digital Accessibility Consortium has been focused on helping the people who want to get the skills to get the skills. But now a lot of them are out there without the rest of the program, the rest of the support. Jump into our conclusion. I'll let Nick summarize, because he's done a lot of listening. So I bet he can summarize really well.
Sounds good. Yeah, I was going to hop in and let you know that the quote's coming. It's really close, Lane. But yes, that's how we did it, is exactly how IDAC did it. And it's, it started with our head honchos talking about accessibility, and we took a look at what how the landscape is for accessibility. And yeah, this is where we're at. So we're trying to step back and, like Lane said, put out those less looking at putting out those fires and more looking at this whole systems change, and how do we get people to buy in on this whole system change. And so, the summary is what accessibility is: the ability to access any environment, regardless of your ability or the use of specific facilities, right, or faculties. And it's about making it accessible, making things accessible to everyone. And like Lane mentioned on the quote, accessibility is it's not a project, it's not a one and done. Even with our work with assistive technology, once you figure it out, it changes. It is a lifestyle that you have to live, and you have to stay kept up on. And it sounds daunting at first, but it's really not. Once an organization decides that they're going to stick to accessibility and work towards accessibility, it becomes part of your lifestyle. It becomes part of your workflow. And even looking at our past trainings and putting out those fires for the skilled people, teaching these skilled people about accessibility and where they might have knowledge gaps, it's really become a part of their lifestyle, right? They are incorporating all of these accessibility principles into their work now, and it's having outcomes. It's pretty straightforward. And it looks like, Lane, you pulled that from CSUN. So that's 2022. Yes. Wonderful.
Yeah. The California State University Northridge Assistive Technology Conference was a couple weeks ago in Anaheim, California. And that was one of the quotes that was floating around in a lot of the sessions that everyone at the conference was kind of rallying around. It's not a project, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah, so just that we have our contact information up here. You are always welcome to reach out to us, shoot us an email or give us a call. We're happy to help in any way we can, as long as it's related to accessibility and assistive technology. And yeah, so I don't know if you had any other closing thoughts, Lane.
Just, we are still here for that technical assistance and training as well. So we're still here to help put out those fires for those skilled people, but we definitely, in terms of the training, wanted to take that step back and start looking at what else we can be doing to help support these people who are gaining incredible skills, doing fantastic work, but may feel like an island unto themselves, so to speak, and like they are just trying to battle a huge wildfire of inaccessible information, resources, and experiences because the rest of their micro society, their micro culture within their agency is not thinking about it. So how can we help support that within organizations? And I'm really looking forward to April and May and our guest presenters. Woo, you don't have to listen to me and Nick for 45 minutes. Yes.
Always happy to have SMEs around.
Yes. Letting them share some experiences about successes they are having in their organizations, putting together some of these other pieces. I'm really looking forward to it. And thanks for sticking it out with us.
Take care, everyone.